Okay, and I'm just going to say good morning and thank you so much for being here. My name is Jen Park. I'm the Community Engagement and Talent Development Specialist at the Ramapo Catskill Library System. This session comes from System Services actually requested that this session be held. So thank you to those who serve on the System Services Committee. I think this will be of great value to the members and the member libraries. And thank you so much, Patty Sussman, for setting this up. We do have Kristen here today from Overdrive. This slide deck will be made available to registrants at the end of the program, probably later today. I'll send out an email and you'll have access to all of this information. If you have questions during the session today, please remain muted. But you can place your questions in the chat and we will be monitoring the chat, and the questions will most likely be answered towards the end rather than in the middle of the session. So at this time, it is 10 a.m. I'm going to turn it over to Kristen. If you have any connectivity issues, I know it's very cold out there today, maybe a little bit windy in your area. Feel free to drop off, come back in. You will not be disrupting anyone. And if you need to reach me at any time, you can do so through the chat, but I'll also be monitoring my email as well as my phone. So thank you, Kristen. Go ahead, take it away.
Thanks, Jen. So as she mentioned, my name is Kristen Price. I am your Overdrive account manager. And if you have questions throughout, feel free to put them in the chat. There will be dedicated time at the end though, to actually go over some Q&A. I will ask that you keep muted, and as Jen asked, feel free to email or Slack her if you have any connectivity issues. We're located in Cleveland, Ohio, and we're actually getting a bit of a snowstorm today, so they're just flurries, so I should be okay, but I understand that cold and wind for sure. So today we're going to be learning how to manage your Advantage collection in Overdrive Marketplace. As Jen mentioned, this session is being recorded and you will receive the PDF of this slide deck later today, if not tomorrow. Forgive me, I will sometimes be turning my head. I have multiple screens in front of me and I want to make sure that we're on the right side. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So agenda for today, in this 1 hour session, we are going to do an overview of Advantage and lending models, including shopping across lending models, creating automated carts, managing holds. We're going to look at running a few reports and some scenarios, how to contact Overdrive, whether it's invoicing or through a support ticket like technical support or authentication. We're going to do a live demonstration of an Advantage marketplace and look at some of the things that we talk about earlier on. And then I'll leave you with some resources. And as I mentioned, have time for Q&A. So to get started, just as a quick recap, Advantage is a way for public libraries to take full advantage, kind of pun intended, of their Overdrive shared collection. So it's really built for members of a consortium shared collection. And with Advantage, you can offer titles exclusively for your users, create customized collections, and a lot more. So as I mentioned, Advantage is a great way for member libraries to offer specialized content to their local patrons, to reduce their users' wait time on popular titles, and to offer continued access to that shared collection that RCLS has been building up over years. Now, with the additional Advantage Plus sharing feature, members can share eligible titles from their Advantage collection with the consortium collection. However, they're maintaining priority on those holds for their own users. So you use local funds to buy those titles or additional copies. Your patrons are always going to have priority to those wait lists. Now, this is set up by RCLS, so there's nothing you need to do to manage the sharing. All of your Advantage titles, not including pre-orders, are automatically shared every Monday morning. So it is on a weekly basis. So if you're purchasing Advantage content, say on Tuesdays, so that's a big new title day, those titles would be restricted to just your Advantage users until the following Monday when they're shared with the rest of RCLS. So I did want to clarify the setup as of now is only going to share those Advantage titles, not including pre-orders, every Monday morning. So depending on what your purchasing frequency is, there may be some days where it is restricted to just your Advantage users. We're going to get into lending models a little bit later, but I did want to show a quick snapshot of the lending models that can and cannot be shared through Advantage Plus. So really those multi-user lending models, that cost per cert or simultaneous use, that is automatically restricted from Advantage Plus sharing. So those titles, if you add any through your Advantage account, will automatically always be limited to just your Advantage users. It's more of the standard lending models where you're purchasing individual copies, the one copy, one user, metered access, etc., that are eligible to share with the rest of the consortium. So what does this look like for your end users? So after your patrons sign in to either the Overdrive powered website, rcls.overdrive.com, or the Libby app, they're going to have a seamless experience because they're only going to see one collection. By logging in with your library's card, we're automatically combining everything available to them as an Advantage patron and as the shared collection. So this is going to include both of those collections. And Advantage members do have a custom URL where they can share with their patrons to see Advantage titles kind of right from the beginning. But that's why we always encourage users to sign in right away, that more titles may be available for them, because we can really only identify them as an Advantage patron, having additional access to that CPC or a lower wait time, things like that, when they sign in with that card. So we're identifying your patrons from the library card that they signed in with to determine if they're an Advantage user, which Advantage user, what's their availability, etc. But your patrons don't necessarily know the difference. I do want to touch base really quick a little bit about how holds work for Advantage users. So when Advantage users place a hold on a title that has been purchased both by the consortium and Advantage library, that user is essentially placed on two waiting lists. There's a waiting list for the Advantage copy, which is prioritized to users of their same library. And then there's the waiting list for the consortium copy, which is from all member libraries of the consortium on a first come, first served basis. So users who are kind of on both of those waiting lists are going to receive whichever copy of the title becomes available first. Typically, since Advantage waiting lists are always shorter, it's likely the users are going to end up with the Advantage copies, but they do have access to both. They do kind of move through and get whichever one becomes available first. And then once they receive a hold, once they receive their holds notification on that copy, they're essentially removed from both. So I just wanted to explain kind of how the back end works. You will not see two waiting lists from Marketplace. Your patrons will not see two waiting lists, but I kind of want to explain how hold fulfillment works from Advantage versus consortium. So speaking of Marketplace and kind of where you'll see everything, for those that don't know, Marketplace is our back-end shopping and administrative portal. Advantage content is purchased by library staff through a special Advantage login for Overdrive Marketplace. Now, it will have ADV in the username. It'll be ramapocatskill.adv. Typically your library name. Whereas if you're logging into a consortium collection, it would be ramapocatskill.lib. So this username is really important because that's what determines who has access to the titles that you're purchasing. If you're logging in with ramapo.lib, that's going to be equal access for everyone in the consortium, no priority to your home users. You want to make sure you're logging in with ramapo.adv for your Advantage localized content to make sure your local patrons have first dibs on those copies, etc. So it is important to note which username you're logging in with. And we'll look, there's another way to see this once you logged in, just to kind of double check, make sure you're purchasing in the right collection. And we'll look at that when we do a demo. So a little bit about Marketplace. So here, as I mentioned, is where libraries purchase additional copies of a title. They can purchase new copies across lending models, create automated carts, track success of their Advantage collection with reports, manage holds, support a ticket to OverDrive support, and much more. So we're going to explore some of these Marketplace features together. I'll dig into these a little bit more, but some kind of best practices for utilizing Marketplace tools and reports. Shop the sales in Marketplace, which we'll talk about on the next slide. We have a sale going on at any time of the year. Publishers really like to work with libraries and try to offer some discounts where they can. Take advantage of automated carts like Holds Manager. Utilize the recommend to library feature based on requests that your patrons are making. It's a guaranteed checkout. A recommendation would maybe be support the current holds by price. Maybe stock up on some of those low cost options that have higher holds. They tend to be the romances. And then you could also look for some patrons with low checkouts or low holds and kind of satisfy that hold, maybe if it's only 1 or 2 on a title, to encourage patron satisfaction and also turn them into a repeat user, right? So also the best tool, your Overdrive team. So we'll talk about all of us a little bit later, but feel free to contact us with any questions or recommendations on managing your collection. So as I mentioned, sales. So Marketplace runs sales and promotions throughout the year. Sales are a great way to fill holds as they're often high demand premium content at lower prices. Some are annual sales that are going to happen seasonally, which I've noted on this slide here. And there are a couple ways to view upcoming sales or promotions. The first one is the Resource Center, which there is a link to under the Support tab in Marketplace. Otherwise, it's just resources.overdrive.com. We'll look at that a little bit more later. You could visit the News tab in Marketplace. There's a News and Update section, which lists all of our current sales with links to title lists and so on of the content on sale. Or we can also notify you of upcoming sales and promotions. So if you haven't signed up for our weekly newsletter called Content Wire, it not only informs you of content trends and new releases, but it also lists all of our current promotions, sales, lets you know last chance when things are wrapping up, and so on. You can sign up in the drop-down menu under your name in Marketplace. So I want to talk a little bit about what lending models are available for you. So most of you are familiar with the one copy, one user lending model. Works very much like physical titles in your collection. You purchase one copy of a book and it never expires. Now, I do want to know, it doesn't seem like this as much anymore, but majority of the titles in our catalog, probably almost 75%, are available in this lending model. This is kind of the preferred option for libraries because you could just kind of purchase and forget about it. Now, we do also offer a metered access lending model, and it seems more and more that there are metered access in Marketplace, and I think that's because a lot of the Big 5, Big 6 publishers have gone metered at this point. But metered access titles, similarly, you purchase one copy at a time, and they can be purchased, almost all of them, by one patron at a time, like one copy, one user, just like physical items, except they expire from your collection after a set period of either time, a set period of checkouts. So maybe you're purchasing 26 uses, and after that has been all used up, then you would have to repurchase a copy. That lending model is pretty favorable with libraries, checkouts by or metered access by checkouts, because whether it takes 6 months or 5 years to go through those 26 licenses, you know that you're getting the full return on it. And then there are some publishers, not a whole lot left. I want to say W.W. Norton is one of them, that metered their access by a combination of time or checkouts. So the earlier of time or checkouts, which isn't really ideal. Luckily, most publishers have gotten off that lending model. We do now also offer a metered access concurrent users. So similarly to metered access by checkout, you're purchasing a certain number of licenses, but unlike most of the metered access lending models, the concurrent users can be used at the same time. So really great for book clubs or things where you need that multi-user access. And then speaking of multi-user access, those are our last two lending models. So cost per cert is really great because you can add titles free of charge and only pay a fee if it gets checked out. Multiple users can access this lending model at a time. And I'm going to dig in a little bit more to cost per cert specifically on the next slide. And then lastly, we have simultaneous use. So these are titles that you buy in packages. Publishers range them from typically 25 to 100. Source books and some others do offer single title simultaneous use, which is really awesome. And they expire from your collection after a set period of time. Typically it's 1 year. That source books one I mentioned does have a 1 month or 30-day option. Really awesome for a community read or book club because there's no holds, unlimited access, unlimited copies in use for that flat rate. So looking at cost per cert a little bit more. So CPC titles are great for testing out different genres or authors and languages before actually committing to purchasing a copy up front. Let's see if there's any interest before we buy, a more permanent copy. Now, generally, they are more mid to backlist and not the newest, most popular titles, although more and more publishers like Penguin Random House are offering this lending model, which really helps with some of those holds. I actually got an alert this morning that Macmillan is now offering over 1,200 titles available in CPC, which is huge for this publisher because they tend to not be flexible. So as I mentioned, CPC is a great way, especially with these bigger publishers, to fulfill holds less expensively. So there's kind of a sweet spot for holds in CPC, which we'll talk about a little bit more. But if something has holds, but not maybe a ton of them, maybe you only have, a couple of your Advantage patrons waiting, looking at, can I wipe out this whole wait list for less than a copy of purchasing maybe a 1 copy, 1 user metered access? So it is kind of about that sweet spot and seeing what makes sense, which we'll talk about a little bit more. So many libraries also choose to highlight one title for an entire community read or book club, as I mentioned. Since these CPC titles can be borrowed simultaneously by an unlimited number of patrons at a time, until your budget runs out, you do get to set kind of a safety net budget cap. This lending model is a great option for that. So it's also generally good for audiobooks, which on average are about $4 to $5 a checkout, compared to potentially close to $100 for a 1 copy, 1 user lending model, depending on the title. So really great for that as well. Sorry. So the shared collection, RCLS, does determine how many CPC titles an individual user can borrow per format each month. Now, this limit will apply universally to any and every Advantage member that has CPC titles. And this cap is really to ensure that power users don't eat up your entire budget in a given month. So RCLS actually has these set pretty high. So a user can borrow up to 8 CPC ebooks in a month, 8 CPC audiobooks in a month, or 8 CPC videos in a month. So CPC titles, if they're added at both the consortium and Advantage, the consortium copy is going to circulate first. If there are no available copies, then it will be checked out from your Advantage collection. The same thing goes if you have multiple formats of a title. So if you have maybe one copy, 1 user, a metered access copy of a title, and then you added a CPC to kind of supplement some of those holds or something like that. The one copy, one user and metered access, if it's available, is always going to circulate before that CPC copy that essentially will charge you a fee. So just wanted to explain kind of that circulation behavior. And then I also want to know, I had mentioned that CPC titles cannot be shared through Advantage Plus. And that is even if you have another lending model, the title available in another lending model. So a library must kind of revoke that CPC title before it can be shared. Now, that is only if a CPC version is added before the title is shared. So if you're within maybe that week time before your Advantage copy is shared and you've purchased a one copy, one user and added a CPC, it's not going to be shared until that CPC is revoked or removed. Now, when an Advantage member wants to add CPC to an existing title that's already been shared through Advantage Plus, the title will display an increased unit count for all users in the shared collection, even if they don't have access to that library CPC title. Now, as a result, a user may see the option to borrow a title, but then will be unable to complete the checkout. They'll receive a message to place a hold instead. Now, I only tell you this to be aware. It has come up in support questions before. Our teams are aware of this behavior. Frankly, the option to place a hold is better than an error message. And we are hoping to rectify this in the future. However, we need to completely rewrite our backend system for a different behavior. So I just, we don't necessarily want a CPC title record and a one copy, one user title record. So you're seeing two versions of the same title. So we're working on a way to potentially fix this issue, we'll call it. But I just do want to let you know, if CPC is something you're exploring at the Advantage level and you've already shared the title, there may be some confusion over your non-Advantage patrons, but they're prompted to just place a hold for a consortium copy, the one copy, one user copy, something like that. So just so you can be aware, but it is a giant undertaking for us to, I guess, quote unquote, fix it. So no ETA on that at this time, but I just want to keep you aware of what an experience may be in terms of cost per circ and Advantage Plus sharing. Okay. So as I mentioned, in terms of cost per circ, it's all about finding that sweet spot. So a couple things, not all titles are available in CPC. Publishers determine which lending models they want to offer their titles in. So not all titles, not all of your holds lists will be available in CPC, and not all may make sense financially. Sometimes if there's a huge wait list on a title, it may make more sense to buy a more permanent copy than to pay per checkout. So one thing that we really recommend is utilizing an advanced search to find which titles are available in CPC and perhaps which makes more sense. As I mentioned, if there's a lot of holds or it's a title that's going to be popular for years, it may make more sense to buy a permanent copy. Now, you do not have to have a one copy, one user metered access to utilize cost per circ. You can add brand new titles. Maybe you're seeing if a language is popular, things like that. You can add cost per circ without having a permanent copy. But I think for Advantage libraries, a lot of times that's often used to help with those wait times to fulfill those holds a little quicker. So on the cost per circ page for Marketplace, on the left-hand side under the shop dropdown, you will see cost per circ. Hopefully later this year, we'll be combining into one view for all lending models. But in the meantime, simultaneous use and cost per circ, those multi-user lending models are kept separately. We'll look at that during the demonstration portion. But we recommend doing an advanced search and saving this search so you can frequently look for CPC titles that may be on hold. So for instance, I looked last week, so this may be different today now that we have some of those Macmillan titles, but there were over 2,400 titles available in CPC that have at least one RCLS hold. Now, I'm not necessarily saying this is your specific Advantage library. I didn't look at specifics, but in general, an RCLS holds somewhere in the system. Now, the question is to ask yourself, can I clear out my user's wait list for less than a price of the title itself? So I looked at this one title in particular, Neon Gods. There were 5 active Advantage holds, again, throughout the consortium, but the CPC price is only $150. So you could potentially clear out all of the holds on this title for less than $8. Now, comparing that to purchasing a more permanent copy for about $15, which circulates 1 patron at a time. That's another thing with cost per cert. All 5 of those patrons are getting their holds notification that first day. So can I clear it out, in 2 weeks time, or is it going to take months to go through that one copy, one user copy, for example? Okay. So I always like to touch base on this in Advantage sessions, just kind of showing you what information you're seeing in the search results, how to determine if you own a title, if there's holds on a title, things like that. So on the search results page, you can see the cover art of the title, as well as all of the title metadata, title, author, series, publisher info, more. Under the title, we will list what format it is in. And actually we have an update since this graphic where it actually lists out the specific format. So if it's a Kindle book, if it's an EPUB, OverDrive Read, etc. You have the option to sample the title as well. In the blue box, we will always list the lending model it is available in. On the right-hand side, we include the price above the add to cart button. And then we include some data under it. So the copies are how many copies of that title are in your collection, and we do break that down by lending model. Then we look at Lucky Day. So if you're utilizing the Lucky Day feature, how many copies of that title are designated to that? Under holds, we do separate active holds from suspended holds. So some libraries like to only purchase extra copies or CPC or things like that. They only like to consider those active holds, those patrons that they get that notification today, they want that title. Suspended holds are often directed from when patrons opt to deliver their title later, or there are some patrons that like to do that from the beginning, where they can continue to move up the hold list, but they won't get their holds notification. They aren't kind of actively waiting for that title. This is often, personally with me, I sometimes do this. If all of my titles become available at once, I only like to read so many titles at a time. So I may suspend a hold and say, I'm currently reading something else, ask me again in 2 weeks or something like that. We include the holds ratio, and under some checkout data, we include the amount of copies that are currently checked out. Now, I do want to note here that sometimes there are questions about, well, it shows that none are checked out, but we have holds. The patron has to formally borrow the title before that number is reflected under this out field in Marketplace. So if they're in that 3-day limbo where they received their holds notification, but haven't opted to borrow the title, redeliver later and suspend their hold or cancel their hold, that's not going to be reflected in Marketplace. So I just want to note that that out is when a patron formally borrows the title, it's actively on their shelf. We'll reflect it under the amount of copies that are currently checked out. And then checkouts data, we include when the last or most recent checkout was, how many checkouts there were in the past year, and how many checkouts all time on that title. Anything in a blue box will be hyperlinked, meaning you can click on it for more information. Now, what does this mean for an Advantage user? So we actually add an additional line of data. So the consortium line is always going to represent RCLS, the shared collection, and the Advantage line, as long as you are logged in with that Advantage username, is going to represent your Advantage collection. Now, if you're a system user, you've logged in with rcls.lib. Usually it's first initial last name. That Advantage line may be an aggregate of all of the Advantage accounts in RCLS. To see your specific Advantage data, you have to be logged in with your Advantage login, okay? And same type of information here, how many copies are owned at each. We do have the Advantage Plus column there, and the Advantage Plus on the consortium line is going to represent how many copies of that title are available and shared throughout all Advantage libraries, whereas the Advantage Plus kind of figure on the Advantage line is going to represent what you personally have shared through Advantage Plus. So in this example, I have 2 Advantage copies, 2 metered access Advantage copies of the other Black Girl, both of which are shared already. So it says Advantage Plus 2 on my line. There's another 26 Advantage Plus shared copies from other members, and so on. Under the holds, we separate how many are specifically your users, as noted on the Advantage line, compared to the rest of the system, and so on. Okay, so getting into some of the automated parts that are available to you. So Holds Manager, we do recommend that every Advantage account set up a Holds Manager plan. So this allows you to respond to demand on titles quickly and easily by building or even automating orders based on holds. As I mentioned, as best practice, we do recommend setting it up. As long as it's set up in your Advantage account, it's only going to consider your patron's Advantage holds. So again, we recognize that because you're an Advantage account, the username that you're logging in with, we're automatically having identified who your Advantage patrons are, and we're only showing you those holds in this plan. So we'll look at that a little bit later when we get into our demonstration. We also have automated carts for recommendations. So the RTL manager allows you to quickly and easily either build carts or automate orders based on title recommendations from your users. Again, as long as you're in your Advantage account, it's only going to look at your local patrons' recommendations. And then lastly, we have Smart Lists. Now, for the most part, Smart Lists help you build carts based on any criteria that you specify. Now, originally, this was built before we had a lot of other great collection development tools to help you recommend what to actually buy after holds and recommendations. But today, I really recommend using Smart Lists to help manage either the repurchasing of metered access content. So it really helps to identify, we do send you emails when 5 checkouts or less are remaining on metered access by checkout, or when 30 days or less on metered access by time. But maybe that's not enough for you. These Smart Lists can customize that even further. Maybe you want to know when there's only 1 or 2 checkouts left, because those 5 checkouts could take 6 months. Or maybe you want to say, hey, this title is expiring this week. Remind me about it. You can also customize some collection development and say, I only want to consider purchasing again if I have a patron with a hold on the title, or it checked out so many times, or something like that. Really making sure, helping you with those collection development policies and decisions based on that metered access content. So Smart Lists are a great tool for that. A little bit on reports, and I want to focus on Advantage level specific reporting. So checkouts report, obviously the best place to report on checkouts or usage. Now, from an Advantage user, you have the ability to report both on all activity your patrons performed, whether you personally bought the title or not. And you can also report on all activities on the titles you bought, whether it's through your own Advantage patrons or if you shared it and another consortium patron checked it out. So I'm not going to dig into this too much, but you will have this as follow-up. But here are some steps on how you would run a checkouts report if you wanted to see your personal patron activity. So you customize by your branch, and you can say show all checkouts bought by the consortium and or Advantage and or other Advantage, etc. And then, oh, I went too far, sorry. And then we also have steps on what would you do if you want to see which checkouts you had in your Advantage purchase titles, regardless of whether it was your patron or not. So this is a really great way to see the return on your investment, and just kind of editing a few of the filters, you can see which checkouts were made on your Advantage owned titles. Okay. Okay, current holds report. Pretty self-explanatory in terms of the best place to find what patrons are currently waiting for. From the Advantage side, the Advantage holds column or ADV column is always going to represent your patrons as long as you're logged in with that Advantage username. Again, this is why that Advantage username is kind of key to what Marketplace displays for you. So we recognize who your patrons are from that login. So regardless of what you kind of filter the report to, ADV holds is always going to represent your patrons. Now, similarly to the holds report, there are a couple ways that you can run, similarly to the checkouts report, there are a couple ways you could run the current holds report based on what you're interested in seeing. So I've included both of those options here. So we have a few options. You can put your specific library in the branch. The holds list is going to be a little bit shorter, and you'll notice that the all holds column and the Advantage holds column is going to be the same number. It is essentially only showing you the holds of your patrons. So you're seeing nothing else from RCLS. You're only seeing your patrons' holds, which is certainly fine. But if you want to get a feel for kind of the full picture and see, okay, well, I only have 5 patrons waiting, but there's another 150 at RCLS, I think it's important to kind of see both sides of things. And in this case, you could run the report for all branches, and you'll see that the all holds column is going to represent RCLS, and the Advantage holds column will represent your patrons. So I think that's a nice way to kind of see the full picture, especially if you're sharing those titles and benefiting the rest of the group. Maybe that makes more sense. As a best practice, we always recommend sorting the Advantage holds column descending. So you see the most in-demand titles amongst your patrons at the top of the list. Again, you'll get this deck as a follow-up, so you don't have to write down kind of these steps. Title status and usage report. This is really the best place to find a list of titles in your Advantage collection. So often we get requests, I want to see everything in my Advantage collection currently. The title status and usage report would be the best place for that. Okay, so under the Insights tab in Marketplace, you'll find all of these reports. And typically what we would recommend doing here is changing the period type to specific and then leaving the dates blank so it runs inception through today. You will want to check the Advantage titles only box. I do always recommend with any of these reports, changing the period type to specific, and then you can customize with calendar dates, whether it's your fiscal year, the last calendar year, whatever it may be, rather than using, say, the last rolling 30 days or rolling 90 days or things like that. I think for the most part with usage or even orders or anything like that, working off calendar dates is best. Okay, so at this point, I am going to get into Marketplace and show you some of the things I have discussed and kind of look at some of the others. So hopefully you are all seeing this Marketplace page. I am in an Advantage account, signed in with that Advantage username, and we can identify this a few ways. So first of all, in the top right corner, it will specifically say your member library name in front of Ramapo Catskill Library System. So if it just says your name and Ramapo Library System, you're in the consortium account and everything purchased would be equal access to everyone in the system. To identify that you're in your Advantage account, it would specifically say your member library name. You'll also be able to see this at checkout. There's a notification. This is an Advantage order. Titles will be restricted to your patrons unless you participate in Advantage Plus sharing, which RCLS does. So a couple things here. Initially, I had mentioned a while ago, if you wanted to opt into our content wire emails to be alerted of sales or content trends or things like this, you can opt into those here. At the top, we always have a rotating banner of a few things. Usually it always highlights a sale, upcoming top pre-orders for the next month, and so on. Sales will also always be noted as the first few collections. You'll see we always start off January with a new year, new you sale. It's often a lot of nonfiction, but that's one of those standard seasonal orders. Come February, we always do a romance sale and so on. You'll also be able to note these sales under the news tab. So we list our current content sales. There's any highlights, product releases or overview, and it also links to our social media. I also want to, real quick. Okay. I also want to note this support tab here. So this is a great place to find your contacts. So I will note on the right-hand side here, you do have a dedicated team here at Overdrive that work with all New York public libraries. Myself is your account manager with my email address and direct phone extension. And I also partner with Claire and Nicole. So Claire is a content specialist. So if you have specific questions about titles in Marketplace, if you're not finding a title in Marketplace and want to request that we add it or something along those lines, Claire is the best person for those. Or if there's a metadata issue, you know, sometimes we run in where it's a wrong cover art image, anything like that, Claire's kind of the content expert. Also really great if you need any help with curation, which we didn't talk about today, but if it's needed, I'm happy to share some follow-up resources on how to find that, as well as cart requests. So you can feel free to email Claire, say you're not a juvenile selector, but you have $250 to spend on juvenile. Claire can put together a recommended cart for you if that would be helpful. And then we also partner with Nicole, who is your product support specialist. So Nicole is, think of your technical contact. So if you're having issues or encountering bugs, she's the best person. If you have questions about cataloging, mark records, anything along those lines, Nicole's probably the best person for that. But as always, we can say, feel free to email me and I'll get it to the right person if it's not myself. At the bottom here, under Contact Us, we do have some options to contact other teams at Overdrive, including technical support, whether that is you as a staff member are encountering an issue or you've received something from a patron. We recommend submitting here. I do recommend with patron issues going directly to technical support rather than Nicole or myself. They tend to have more access to assist patrons. Patrons can also reach out to technical support directly through Libby under the Get Some Help section, or RCLS also offers frontline support. So if they're on the website at rcls.overdrive.com, at the bottom, if they go to Get Support, there's a similar kind of support form that they can fill out to work with technical support directly. We also have invoicing support. So if you need to work with our accounting team on applying content credit or an issue with an invoice or anything along that, you can submit a form to them here. And then also authentication support. So typically this is probably a consortium or higher level thing, but if patrons are having trouble logging in or something kind of outside of the library assistance, but having trouble accessing Overdrive, you can reach out to our authentication support. In the middle section here are some great help and resources, which I'm going to talk about on the next slide. marketplace questions, Libby questions, general Overdrive questions, is a direct link to our resource center, which is really powerful and we're going to talk about. And also live training webinars. So similar to this one, our training team leads multiple webinars throughout the month that are available to you. And then I also want to touch base on the featured tab. So this is really great. This does redirect to that resource center, but Claire and her team are all librarians, dedicated content specialists. So in addition to helping partners directly, they're also putting together really awesome lists that your library can utilize. So there are some reoccurring ones like Starred Review or recently on NPR. We have a lot of kind of 2021 wrap-ups right now, best books of the year, things like that. These are not only great titles to see or great lists to see if there are gaps in your collection, but also curation ideas. So great trending topics, things like that. And if you click on more lists, it will direct you to the resource center, but all of these will open up a list in Marketplace. You can see if you own the title yet, if you should purchase one, things like that. Okay, so a couple things. Clicking on Overdrive Marketplace will take you back to the home page, in addition to the back button. Forgive me, I'm kind of looking at the screen over here. So I did want to touch base. This shop tab here is where you'll find that cost per cert or simultaneous use. We didn't dig into it too much, but we also have databases and streaming media. For any that previously worked with RB Digital, these are things like Universal Class, IndieFlix, Law Depot, and the like. So all of those kind of products, I guess you could say, because they're not a title like an ebook and an audiobook, they're more of a service. They all fall into the cost per cert or simultaneous use lending model, which is noted on that page. So if you purchase at the Advantage level, those services will be limited to just your users. And that's because pricing is based on just your users and so on. But looking at cost per cert, on the home page here, we do, our content specialists have put together some ebook bestsellers, audiobooks, great book club picks, nonfiction, really great deals. So there are some as low as, 10 cents, 30 cents. But some of just like purchasing standard titles, some of the more popular, newer content tends to be a little bit more expensive. So it is finding that sweet spot. We also feature some videos here, but I recommend doing the advanced search. And you can customize anything you're looking for. Maybe you just want ebooks, maybe you just want things published in the last few years, maybe adult fiction, things like that. But if I'm scrolling down to the bottom here under holdings, you can customize if you want to see anything, if you want to see titles already available in CPC. But I like looking for this Advantage hold. So I want to say, show me any CPC titles that have at least 2 or more of my Advantage user holds. Now, if you wanted to save this search, so anytime you come into Marketplace, you don't want to run this advanced search, you just want to click a button, it automatically pull up as of that date CPC titles with 2 or more holds, you can save this search. Otherwise, I'm just going to hit search. And so I am just kind of demoing this in Newberg's Advantage account. So there are currently 75 CPC titles available in CPC that have 2 or more Newberg patrons on hold. So you can review this and look, as I mentioned, for some of those PRH ones, if they're a newer release, they are a little bit more. So in this case, it's $5.50 for an individual checkout. And there are 17 holds. So maybe that's a little much. Maybe that's something you want to buy a more permanent copy of. But if you're at the point where maybe there's just 2 holds, and that would be what, $11 to fulfill that, that's less than purchasing a copy at, say, $55 or at $27.50 for a 12-month option or something like that. So it's really kind of finding that sweet spot, but you do have to go to this shop tab, cost per cert, to view it. I do want to note as well, I had mentioned a monthly budget. So CPC titles, rather than just, there's that fear that, I'll get a surprise invoice for $1,000 or something like that. you will set a budget cap in order for any CPC titles to circulate. So that's featured here. It's also on the left-hand side when you go to the CPC homepage. But you can opt to, you know, I'm willing to add these ebooks as CPC, but I only am willing to pay $100 on it this month. So what would happen in this case is that title could be checked out, in this case at $5.50 a checkout, up to $100. At that time, users would just place a hold on a title until a new monthly budget begins. Now, you will get alerted when 80% of your budget is used in case you want to add additional funds. Maybe I'm willing to add another $20 or something like that. But this budget really helps kind of make sure there are no surprise invoices, as I mentioned, but also help manage that budget a little bit more, because I think that's a fear with pay-per-use type models. So you will set those per format. So unfortunately at this time, we don't have a way to do it per title. So if you have multiple ebooks that you've added as CPC, that budget of $100 is going to go for all of those ebooks. And we'll kind of fulfill those based on if there are holds, the oldest holds across all of those titles. So fortunately, can't do it per title at a time. If you are trying to utilize it for a community read or book club and you have a set budget per title, we would recommend only adding that title in that format as CPC, at least through your program. Okay, and I had mentioned the Insights tab is where all of our reports are. You can start typing to search for a report. You can click on these other drop downs. The reports that I touch base on today are all featured under popular reports. We do have some great statistics for fiscal year-end reporting. I would recommend using this holding section. You can customize the end date, see what's in your Advantage collection, see what's in the RCLS collection, see what's shared from other Advantage members. Some caveats here are that it does not include any titles that are expired. So if your state report requires that you include those expired titles, I would recommend the purchase title summary report, which will include kind of every title you bought in that time frame, whether it's expired or not. Okay, so I talked about a lot of the things we talked about in Marketplace. I do want to go back to my slide. Hopefully you see that again. And I want to leave you with some follow-up resources. So as I mentioned, and we saw under that support tab in Marketplace, we do have a bunch of websites that do not require a login. So anyone on your staff can access these directly. Otherwise, we do link to them under the support tab, the resource center, resources.overdrive.com. It has trainings just like this on demand, as well as adding titles as CPC, as well as learning about lending models, great how-to videos. This is where you can find marketing materials. This is where you can find those collection lists, and also just FAQs, either about Libby or any of our services. We have specific Marketplace, Libby, and Overdrive help pages as well. I have included my, Nicole, and Claire's contact information here, and we also recommend following us on social media. So our blogs at blogs.overdrive.com is a really wonderful way to stay in the know about future releases, sales, anything like that. So at this point, I have concluded my portion. But I would love to open it up for questions. So you can feel free to take yourself off mute. I don't see any in the chat at this time. So I would ask you to let me know if there are any other questions. Nobody? Well, hopefully this was useful then. If there's any
Kristen, Michelle from Orangeburg has a question. She just raised her hand. Thank you, Patty. Hi, Kristen. This has been great for me. It's wonderful training. Thank you. I know you covered these things, so I'll apologize.
No,
I just want to make sure I get it through my Fiscal. So if I go in and purchase an Advantage title because there's holds on it for my patrons, they get priority. What happens, if there's 20 other people in the system that want it? Do they still keep bouncing above all those people?
They do. So
Okay.
what will happen with those Advantage copies you've purchased, your patrons will always skip over other users from Ramapo as long as there's a wait list. So those holds are always going to be prioritized to your users. So say you buy that Advantage copy because you had 2 patrons waiting, it shares a week later and there's another 20 at RCLS, but then a 3rd patron of yours places it, they're going to skip over those 20 other RCLS patrons that aren't your own. So Advantage titles, regardless if shared or not, are always going to be prioritized to your users.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just wanted to be certain.
Yeah, of course. And I think that's one of the reasons why, obviously Advantage plus sharing is super helpful. Previously those Advantage titles were really siloed to their own users, and we found that this significantly helps the whole system benefit and get through those wait times faster. But you don't want to solely rely on those shared titles because they're being prioritized to their own users too. So if you hit, depending on what your policy is, I think as a best practice for Advantage users, we say try to address when there are 5 of your own users waiting on a title. With limited budget and the cost of titles increasing, it may be closer to say 7 of your patrons waiting today or something like that. So if there is that area where maybe there's only 3 to 4 patrons waiting, if you have budget, great. But it's helpful to see kind of what else is out there, but not solely relying on those shared copies.
Thank you. My other question is the costs per Cert purchases, are those available only to my patrons at that point?
Yes. So
Okay.
cost per Cert is not eligible to be shared. So regardless of what titles you add, what budget you put in place, only your Advantage patrons would be able to access those copies.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
That's
not even an RCLS setting. That is just kind of standard because it's more of a multi-user. And also it prevents you from having to foot the bill for the rest of the system, right? On those pay-per-use type titles. So those and simultaneous use type packages are automatically restricted to your Advantage own users.
Thank you.
Of course. Any other questions?
I just want to say, coming from a consortium standpoint, that when you do that cost per Cert, which I understand, but like as Kristen said, if a patron comes to you and they're like, oh, but it says it's coming up as available, and why can't I get it? It's probably because it's a cost per Cert somewhere, correct? So I just wanted to reiterate that.
Yeah, so previously, way back when, they actually would encounter an error message if they saw that available copy and it wasn't available to them. Now we have updated the behavior where they're prompted to place a hold instead, which is a better user experience. It's not ideal, and I do want to clarify that this only happens in a very specific situation. You need to have already shared a 1 copy 1 user or metered access with the consortium and then added a CPC version. And that's because, as you'll notice on the website and Libby, whatever, there's only 1 title record for a title. They're not seeing 5 copies from each Advantage copy from each Advantage library of a Midnight library. They're not seeing a 1 copy 1 user, a metered access, whatever. We consolidate and they're just seeing, hey, there are 5 copies of this title. Because that is the case, cost per Cert is included in that. So when a cost per Cert is added, if it's already shared, we automatically increase those units by 1 available copy as long as there's budget. If it's a shared title and a non-Advantage user goes to maybe borrow it and then they're prompted to place a hold, it's not available for them personally. As I mentioned, I've been pushing this because I work with a lot of consortia, as you can imagine. I've been pushing this to our development team for a better user experience because there is some confusion at times without completely rewriting our backend systems and potentially breaking it. So you do see 15 separate versions of the same title on your website, which would be an even worse experience. We can't fix this at this time. So it's definitely on our radar. It's hoping we're trying to find a way to make a better experience in the future. But I just want to give some kind of back end why it is the way it is and why we can't fix it yet. But it is a good experience. And I think too, you know, it's really great with cost per circ, you can turn it on and turn it off at your own time. So you're not committing to offering this title and cost per circ for 6 months or even 1 month. Some libraries will turn it on, wait for their patrons to get their holds notification and turn it off a week later. So you can customize when you want cost per circ offerings available to your Advantage patrons. I probably wouldn't recommend going in and adding every CPC title under the sun. But if there are things like a community read, helping clear out some of those holds, or it's something where you're trying to gauge interest, you know, I don't know if I have Chinese speakers in my community. I want to put some Chinese titles in there before I actually allocate a budget towards Chinese or something like that. This lending model is nice for that. Okay. I don't see any other hands, and we are at about 11. Very proud of myself for keeping on time. Are there any other questions while I'm in Marketplace or while you have me? Okay, so as I mentioned, Jen is going to be following up with a recording of this presentation. I will be sending over a PDF of the presentation so you can use it to refer back to. My contact information, if you don't yet have it, is available on that PowerPoint as well as under the support tab in Marketplace. Feel free to send me an email, give me a call if you have any follow-ups you think of after we get off, okay?
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you, everyone. Stay warm. Have a great week. Bye-bye.
Okay.